Lincoln City is being, or David is being played by Lincoln City. Okay, is there anybody there with you? All right. Okay. So
Tony, this is James. I think you're still broadcasting Ziggy Marley. Okay, that's great.
Darn, I wasn't hearing Ziggy.
Oh, darn, yeah, me too.
Okay, I think we can get started. So I'll call this meeting of the Lincoln City Planning Commission July 21st, 2020 to order. James, could we have a roll call, please?
Marcy Baker?
Here.
Kim Blackerby?
Here.
Josh Brainerd? Patty Crowan?
Here.
Lenny Nelson?
Here.
Miles Schlesinger?
Here.
Max Smith?
Here.
Okay. Any agenda changes or revisions? I guess is that you, Ron? Uh-oh.
No changes or revisions.
Okay. All right. We have the minutes from our last meeting, the first week of July. I'm assuming everybody got a chance to look at those. Do I have a motion to accept those minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Lenny. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, Mac. Any discussion on those? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed with a nay? Okay, the minutes are passed. Our agenda tonight has one item on it, and that is the final order for 2020-01, the Cove at Lincoln City Phase 3. We received a findings of fact and conclusions of law with our packet, but then I noticed at about 4 o'clock this afternoon, a second one came in. So was that your doing, Mr. Appicello?
Yep, that was me.
Okay. Did everybody have an opportunity to take a look at that second one that came in late this afternoon?
Let me explain how you get to that.
Okay.
So I reviewed the video, and I did the draft order that's in your packet, which basically leaves it for you to identify what basis you have for denial. In my review, I couldn't find a legitimate basis for denial. There were a number of issues discussed. Trees were discussed. Ultimately, the tree issue was addressed with the condition of approval number 3, which accurately states how development occurs. You can clear trees for subdivision development. You can clear trees for structure development. There was discussion about absorption and market forces. That's not an approval criterion. The applicant pointed out it wasn't an approval criterion. You can't really create a criterion that requires an applicant to demonstrate that they have buyers ready to put down money. That's obviously a different process, a legislative process. You can't do that in the context of an application. And I did state during that meeting that the testimony about absorption and market rate and all that was relevant to you crafting a reasonable timetable of development for the vertical construction. There was an issue of parking, but the code, they meet the code requirement for parking. There seems to be some concern that when you have a development such as this that doesn't really have a lot of on-site parking, you won't have a place for people to park. I think there was a discussion during the hearing about what if you had a party, people come over, where are they going to park? but they do meet the code requirement. That was Anne Marie's testimony. And so you can't, again, change the parking requirements in the context of this application. And then there was a discussion of traffic, specifically, well, what you have is competent substantial evidence in the record and by way of the testimony of the city engineer that the TIA was not triggered by this development and that you basically couldn't combine this development with the prior development approval and justify an imposition of an exaction. As you know, exactions are based upon an analysis of the rough proportionality relationship between the impacts of the development and the improvement requested. Obviously, you have none of that in the record. So imposing a condition of approval or denial for not having one seems to be inappropriate. And when you have an approval, such as a prior subdivision with improvements, those improvements are supposed to be bonded per your code. If you look at the subdivision code, there's supposed to be a contract for construction and security. So if there was a failing in that regard, that those improvements didn't get properly bonded or secured in a contract, then that's not something you can put on this developer. So I'm not sure what other basis you may have, but I can tell you that if I left the blanks there for you to complete, if you want to look at the alternate, which you'd have to reach only by a motion for reconsideration. That is, you passed a tentative motion to deny, you all voted for it, so any one of you could ask for a motion for reconsideration. If that motion is made and seconded and passes, then you basically could take yourself back to deliberations and you could talk about it some more. And then if you want to approve with the conditions, and all I did was take the conditions of approval that your planning director had in her staff report, and I added one more, which had to do with the development, then you could talk about that. But basically, you can discuss now the basis for denial if you want to fill in the blanks on the first order, or you can bring a motion for, someone can make a motion to reconsider, seconded. If it passes, then that brings you back to deliberations, and then you can talk about what you want to do. So that's my advice.
So, Richard, just so I'm clear, the only way we can discuss this second findings document you sent out today is if we put ourselves back into the deliberation process.
Yes, you would bring a motion for reconsideration, and you would, if that motion passes, all it does is you back to deliberations. Now, you could still decide to make the same decision you made before,
Right.
But you just have to take that step back if you want to. Remember, when we bring findings to you, we're supposed to just bring to you what you did.
Right.
And, you know, so that's the first one with the blanks in it, because I couldn't figure out what I could put in those blanks. But if you want to step back and discuss it again, you can do, that's the process. A motion, consideration, a second, a vote, and then you're back in deliberations.
I don't know if we have to go back into deliberation. I thought we voted against it because it had expired 5 or 6 years in the past, the authority to do that. And they had not completed the work that they were supposed to complete. And that's why I thought we declined to approve it. And I don't see any a reason to change my mind on that one point.
This is Lenny.
Go ahead, Lenny.
One of the things, I guess I'd like to have had more than 15 minutes to look at these, but I don't see anything in here that presented as the findings that says what to do about the lack of outlet from that area. onto Highway 101 or any other street. It does say that there's several things about mass, but mass is not the major concern for the neighborhood. I still don't see that they've cleverly, well, let me not say that. It has seemed to me that they have avoided dealing with that subject by breaking this up into 3 phases. And the fact that they don't need a traffic summary or a new traffic study to me doesn't mean that that automatically there's enough, the whole transportation problem has been solved. I think they still have a transportation problem. If they'd like to prove that they don't, then they might want to do a traffic study.
Okay, so I understand, I appreciate your comment, Lenny, that we didn't have a lot of time to take a look at this, to reconsider it. And we can't, as my understanding, we can't really talk about the contents of it unless we reopen the deliberations, go backwards and reopen the deliberations, at which point we could then talk about what's in here and maybe suggest additional conditions or land where we were before with the denial. So
it seems to me, can you hear me?
yes.
I can't tell if I'm on or off. It seems to me that we could, in fact, stay with our motion and fill in the blanks for the reasons why. And that would be one of the reasons why that I would fill in. That the surrounding transportation is not improved enough or suitable for this project.
Okay, we could do that. Mr. Appicello, what could go wrong?
Well, first off, Miles had indicated that, this project didn't go forward. There's nothing in the code that says that you hold a failure of a developer to complete a prior project against them. So there is no criterion that says, because this development failed in the past, you can't approve it now. To the impacts on the transportation impacts on the surrounding property, again, as I mentioned, the competent substantial evidence in the record right now is your city engineer saying this does not meet the threshold for traffic impact analysis, and that the conditions that were imposed in the prior development related to that, and they are not applicable to this development. So I'd say the record doesn't support either one of the points that have been raised. What you make the final decision on this application. If the applicant wants to, they will file an appeal to the city council, and then we'll have a hearing before the city council on all these matters. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just here to tell you what your options are. You can fill in the blanks, bring a motion to reconsider, and talk about the proposal to approve with conditions. Again, the conditions are all Anne Marie listed in her staff report, except that I changed the date to today instead of the 13th for the 1-year approval. And I added the final condition, which has to do with the 5-year timetable of development, which I believe is something the chair mentioned during the discussion.
Okay, so here's the problem that I have with the whole traffic issue. This is a piece, this phase 3 is a piece of a larger development that came before the planning commission, planning department was approved a number of years ago. Because of the size of it initiated a traffic study. And the result of the traffic study was that there were sufficient impacts associated with the build out of the 3 phases that it would require improvements to some of the city streets.
Do you know that? Because I haven't looked at it's not in the record. The prior traffic analysis is not in the record. Were those improvements offered by the applicant at the time? I don't know.
There's no record of the conditions associated
No,
with
it's
that
not
initial approval?
it's not in this record.
Right, okay, all right, but here's what I'm saying. Okay, it's not in this record. So I'm a developer, and I'm gonna come to the city, and I'm gonna propose a master development for a large area. And I'm gonna get approval, but it's gonna be based on some traffic impact study that is gonna require me as a condition of that approval to rebuild X number of streets, whatever. I mean, if this is hypothetical, but I'm trying to figure out if this could happen because it's what looks like happened. So I get an approval with a condition to fix a street. I let that approval lapse. Now I come, and I haven't done the street. Now I come back and I'm only going to ask to do a piece of that larger development. And that piece is not big enough in and of itself to generate a traffic study. The larger piece did, but the smaller piece doesn't. So now I come in and I get approval for development of a piece of a larger master plan development, and I don't have to do the condition that was associated with the larger one and the impacts from traffic that are going to result with the development of that smaller piece attached to the bigger one. To me, that is the definition of piecemeal.
As I stated, that first approval would have tied to it a requirement to enter into a contract and a bond for subdivision security. So the improvement should have been bonded. If there's some reason that's not in the record that we're talking about now, that would explain what happened to that street. But I can't enter anything into the record. All I can do is tell you that the approval of this project is not related to the failure of the prior project. If we had maybe the code should be amended to say you can't do this, but developers divide projects up all the time, and mostly to avoid the imposition of exactions. Does our code have a provision that require us to gather these things up and treat them cumulatively? Probably should, but you know what? We can't write new code now.
But the fact that original one expired takes care of that. They are out of luck, and we should have requirements that they do what they said when they built the 6 units and developed 12 other lots.
And there should have been a bond associated with the improvement required by that condition of approval. Now, I wasn't here. I don't know what happened.
Well, none of us were here and were involved, but it's up to us to stop this ridiculous project that is poorly planned, I think, and not one that should go forward, at least in the sense that the traffic plan is not made properly.
Marcy?
Yeah, so I got a question. So I understand what is in this record and what is not, but we all know that this was initially approved with assessing that the road needed improved. Now, the reason, my understanding was that we do traffic impact studies is for safety. So if we're talking about approving this with knowing that we all know right now that it used to require one, but now it doesn't, whether it was bonded or not, there's no criteria for it. So the subdivision goes in and someone's house catches on fire and a fire truck for some reason isn't able to make it out there. Is the city liable for that? Is the developer liable for that? Are our codes not good enough to protect public safety that we're just not? I mean, the reality is they still want to put the same number of houses in there. So I can't ignore reality, even though there seems to be a loophole for the developers. And I think all of us are on the same page about that, that we're here to care about our community and to make sure that things don't go into place that are going to put whole neighborhoods at risk potentially. That's why there are traffic impact studies, right?
I'm not here to argue with you. If you feel strongly about it, you can craft a reason and place it in the blank in the form. I'm just telling you the evidence in the record is from the city engineer saying it's not triggered. This is an application for phase 3. They could have called it something else. They called it phase 3.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ron.
one thing as you're working on this, as you're developing what it is that you want to do, whether it's to go back to deliberation or to fill in these blanks that Richard has, is the one thing the staff can't do is to become the people that are arguing for the or against the subdivision. So we just can't get put into that position. So when you have a statement or questions like you're developing, if you can form those into a statement, then those are the things that get filled into the blank. And I heard that both from Miles, and I heard it from Marcy as well, that they're both a mixture of questions and comments, but I heard statements that could end up filling in the blank like Richard is talking about. And so as you're crafting this to fill in the blank, phrase it in the form of a statement so that Richard has something he can work off of.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Kim.
So thanks for those words, Ron. I guess what I've heard Richard say, though, there's really nothing that we can put in those statements that would be applicable to allow the development to not happen. In other words, apparently if everything that Anne Marie said was recommended by staff, then there's not much we can say that wouldn't be overruled at city council or somewhere else.
Madam Chair?
Just a minute, Lenny. Is that
Was the response to that, or?
Yeah, it's in response to that, what he just said.
Ultimately, that is your role, is to make a decision. The staff came to you with their recommendations. Ultimately, you need to make a decision as to whether or not it's approved or disapproved or not approved, and the reasons why. If you feel that you should not go with what the staff recommended, then what you need to do is what Richard is talking about, which is to fill in the blank. But that's the role of the Planning Commission, is to take all of the information from the staff, from the developer, and everything else, and then ultimately it becomes for the city, it's going to be something that is defensible, or we'll have to defend it if it's challenged.
So I guess my feeling is that we're supposed to be a volunteer citizenry advisory committee within the provisions of city code and provisions and things like that. So I feel like we're kind of in a catch-22 standpoint. But however, my opinion overall is that I'm very much pro-growth as long as it's for the benefit of the community. And I just don't see that this developer, where we've seen other developers in my short time on the commission have really taken into consideration what the community needs in order for them to get what they want. And I don't see that out of this developer. I don't think that they are taking into consideration the community, but maybe we just can't do that. And so that being the way it is.
Richard?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. When we did our training, we talked about quasi-judicial proceedings and we talked about legislative proceedings. And I believe in my training materials, I told you that the process for quasi-judicial matters is fairly rote. It's, you know, what does the code say? What is in the application material? Does it comply or not comply? You had Anne Marie tell you several times during the hearing that this application complied with all the requirements for the preliminary plat, and preliminary plan, and final plan. You had the city engineer tell you that. So when you take a position that you want to deny it because you don't think it's fair that they're basically getting away with dividing up their project, I understand that the code probably needs to be improved in that regard, but you still have to apply the code as it is. You don't get the right new law now. So I'm generally not here to tell you what you want to hear. So, you know, I'd be kind of worthless if I just said, whatever you said, oh, absolutely, it's the best thing ever. I'm telling you, there are serious problems with just saying, you know what, we're going to relate this back to that approval condition from the prior approval, even though there's nothing in the code that's really going to do that for you. I just advice. I don't make the decision.
And you don't consider that to be somewhat of a dangerous precedent to set in the city in terms of development?
Yeah, I don't accuse me of being pro-development or anti-development. I'm just telling you that the code doesn't say reach back to that prior approval and aggregate all the traffic impacts to justify. I have competent evidence in the record from the city engineer that says traffic impact analysis not triggered by this application. If she could have found somewhere where it said you're allowed to aggregate or compile the impacts, I think she would have said that, but she didn't. And I'm not a traffic engineer, so I'm not going to say I know better than the competent substantial evidence in the record. Do I think we should address this? Yes, but not, you can't amend the code in this application.
Right. Mac?
I'm wondering if this is something that we can potentially recommend as technically correct, but with reservation. Because it sounds like it meets all the benchmarks and this is like technically correct, but we do have some significant reservations about feeling like this is something that can pass forward, but it's like Richard just spent some time telling us that it is technically correct. And there's not anything, like you said, in the code preventing us from going forward, except for, can we say with reservations?
Why is it correct if you have an expired permit to do how many 60 lots or something like that, and you build 6 of the houses, and then you put in the road improvement for another 12, and then you abandon the project for whatever reason, and I think that the time span, it's expired. So let them start a new one or do the work that they have to do for the entire subdivision, which was planned in 1999 or 2000, my recollection.
Lenny?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, but I need to disagree with our attorney. If the city needed no more than people who were supposedly intellectually or by training competent to do certain decisions, they wouldn't need a planning commission. I have no doubts that Richard and Ron and whoever becomes our planning director are competent people. But we are there for the purposes of representing the people of Lincoln City. The same thing with the city council. I'm sure that Ron Chandler could run the city all by himself, but the city council exists to represent the people. And I think that we represent the people. I do not think that everything that comes before us is vote. We just rubber stamp it, or else I could just send in a rubber stamp every week and say, we're done. I think we have a right now. Do we have a problem as far as language? Yes, I think we probably do, but I think it's workable. That's me.
Okay.
Ask me what I really think.
Yeah. Okay. It seems to me that we might want to go back and reopen deliberations and perhaps work a little more to craft the second document that Richard sent. Because while this issue of the street is one, I actually have 6 on my list.
Good.
And so I'm wondering if we can entertain a motion to, I've lost the words, whatever it is, vacate the,
Reconsider.
thank you, reconsider, spend a little bit of time. I would like to just spend a little bit of time going over the 6 items that I've identified, and then potentially bring this back to our next meeting with maybe a revised recommendation.
Now,
Kim.
can I comment on that?
I'm Kim first, and then you, Lenny.
Oh, sure.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm just going to go along with you, Patty, and say, okay, fine, then I move that we reconsider SUB 2020-01 and PUD 2020-01. Did I say that right?
I think so, yeah. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mac. All right. Do we need a roll call, Richard, or can we just?
Can we have a discussion?
Yeah, you should probably have a roll call.
We have a
Okay.
discussion.
Lenny, did you have something you need to say before we vote?
I want to comment on that thing. For one thing, there seems to be a belief that there will be another hearing about this if we agree to this.
No.
We're the last word on this subject.
Correct. There's no other hearing. We're simply going to try to spend a little bit more time
No. I'm
crafting a response. There won't be another hearing, and if we recommend it, that's it.
That's it.
If we don't recommend it, they are free to appeal to the city council.
Correct.
But if we don't recommend it, we have to come up with some criteria as to why.
Correct. That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. James, could we have a roll call? James?
Looks frozen.
James, you're frozen.
Not that.
He looks really cold.
Yeah.
I wish I were.
Can anybody hear me?
There he is. Go ahead, James.
Hi.
Okay.
James.
I was unmuted, but I think you couldn't hear me.
No, we
James,
couldn't.
there was a motion for reconsideration with a second. They asked for a roll call. Essentially, the motion is, do you want to return to deliberations?
I've been roll calling, but it sounded like nobody could hear me. So
Oh, okay.
let's try it again. Marcy Baker,
Yes.
Miles Schlesinger,
Yes.
I couldn't hear if Miles responded.
Yes.
Okay. Patty Crowan,
Yes.
Kim Blackerby,
Yes.
Max Smith,
Yes.
Lenny Nelson.
No.
So it looks like the vote is 5-1 in favor of revisiting the recommendation or the decision.
Okay. All right. So I want to just quickly go through the 6 things that when I saw this first findings and fact with the blanks, what I would have put in to those blanks. We have a brand new development agreement ordinance. It would be really nice if it actually was used. The application was submitted as needed housing. And while Lincoln City certainly has a need for affordable and workforce housing, this application presents neither. There is no housing included in the application. And likewise, no development agreement. So no linkage there between what was suggested and what would actually happen. The second one, we've beaten up pretty much. This is a piece of a larger development that was originally approved that initiated a traffic study. 16th Street was not improved as the condition required. The permit lapsed. Basically, phase 1 and 2 included 28 lots. 75% of those lots have not been developed, but then we were told that phase 2 could not be done unless this phase was approved, indicating to me it is an integral part of the larger project. And I think piecemealing this development now, the street improvement is required to address the cumulative impacts would be ignored. The suggestion that this is affordable housing is questionable due to the costs associated with the extreme amount of cut and fill, plus retaining wall installation that apparently needs to be done to make the lots buildable. We were also told that 700 of the 730 excuse me, trees, or roughly 90% of the trees on the site, need to be cleared and removed. And as Anne Marie stated, that removal needs to be tied to a building permit. We don't have any building permits being applied for in this application. So it seems that clear cutting this acreage prior to the building permit is not consistent with our code. Particularly, I think given the fact that more than 75% of the lots of phase 2 remain undeveloped, that does make me nervous that we would clear cut in advance of the development here. But perhaps that is mitigated by putting a time limit on the vertical structure. The multifamily requires a minimum of 250 square feet per unit that would be recreation area. In our hearing, we were told that the recreation area set aside is actually the drainage swale that would be left natural because it cannot be built upon. There is no plan to provide walking trails, benches, play structure, anything else within this recreation set aside. I don't think that set aside in a swale is consistent with recreation area. Sounds more like open space to me, and not consistent with our ordinance. So that's another question that I had. We didn't get any answer when I asked how the residents would actually recreate in that quote unquote recreation area. The other was Richard has already talked about the expiration date or building completion date. Nothing was offered by the applicant, so I would expect to see that as a condition of approval. There was also no tree replacement plan. There was no preliminary or final landscape plan offered by the applicant. So those are my 6 particulars that led me to want to deny this application. I have them typed up if it would be helpful, James, to have those sent over to you. So, commissioners, thoughts?
This is Lenny.
Yes, Lenny.
I think those are excellent reasons, and I would be glad to help you deny it with all those reasons as reasons why. One of the things that is happening here, and I'm seeing it happen with some regularity, is that we are in the we seem to be spending our time telling the developers all the things they need to do to develop. That's not our job. It's their job to bring us finished plans and development strategies that are meet the code, and then we can say yes or no.
Yes, in a perfect world.
Well,
Just as an aside, planning commissions and planning departments often become reaction departments where developers bring in what they want to do, and the planning department or commission is on the defensive in terms of what they would like to see the city look like. So that's just a soapbox aside. I agree it would be nice if everybody came in with neat and tidy plans and for development, but it's not been my experience.
I wasn't talking about neat and tidy. I was talking about 42 action items delivered to us an hour before the meeting.
Oh, right.
Why should we be doing that?
I see. Okay.
Just to be clear, those were the conditions of approval in the staff report from July 7th.
Right. Those are not any different than what was originally presented by Anne Marie, correct?
Yeah, except the last one.
Except the timing one.
Yeah.
So, so all the discussion in that about the street improvements did not include the whatever the street improvement was required as a condition of the traffic study that had been done.
I stand corrected.
Okay. Other comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Kim.
I guess this is directed towards Richard. Is there anything that Patty said that cannot be included?
Well, the first issue is that the applicant identified this as needed housing in order to take advantage of the statute, which says basically you have to have clear and objective criterion. As I stated during the hearing, I thought we do have clear and objective criterion. The discussion of a development agreement is a negotiated bipartisan agreement. They're not required to do that. Basically, as a developer, you're not required to come in and negotiate with the city for what the staff may want or what the planning commission may want or what the city council may want. You're required to come in, and if you choose to, you can submit an application which the staff applies the law in effect at the time your application is deemed complete to the facts that you submit, and you're either deemed to comply or not comply. If you choose to, you can say, I would like to enter into a development agreement and negotiate. That is not a by right development approval. That is something that is voluntary. So no one's required to come in and submit a development agreement. They can come in as they did and submit and ask to basically comply with the law that's in effect at the time that they submitted their application and it was deemed complete. So the first point that Patty brought up, I don't think is appropriate for those reasons. I think this is a simple quasi-judicial application, and they want to simply have you apply the facts to the law and tell them whether or not they comply or don't comply. Are they trying to take advantage of problems with our code? Yeah, probably. That this was a piece of a larger development that lapsed is factually correct. Yes, there are 28 lots. Does our code say that if you're part of a prior development that lapsed and you happen to come in with a portion of that property that we're required to or apply or address the cumulative impacts of all those prior phases? No, doesn't say that. Again, if the city engineer had something she could hang her hat on, I think that it would have been in her report. Instead, she said this does not meet the threshold for a traffic impact analysis. I think if she could have, she would have pointed to it, but if there was something that would have allowed her to do that. So I think the second reason is difficult to sustain. The issue of clearing 90% and 700 trees, I know it was discussed at length. The problem is that the code, or rather Anne Marie's condition number 3, states comply with the code, and they are going to comply with the code. And at a later time, they will come in for the construction plan approval, and if they propose taking out trees over here because of a road they're building here, staff will say no. But that's what the code requires, that you can build infrastructure and remove the trees necessary for that infrastructure. So staff will look at that, and when they come in for a building permit for the individual buildings, and probably be more than one at a time, staff will look at that, what is necessary to be removed in order to build these buildings. So the third basis stated, I think is questionable because it's already addressed by condition 3, which they've agreed to. The recreation area issue, I understand Patty's concern, but they did say the passive recreation was what they had set aside those areas for. I don't know, maybe you can identify where in the code it says that they have to have the other elements that you're talking about, but we do value passive recreation here. So I'm not aware and what is necessary for the recreation area. I'm not the planner, so that's where I think the other matters that were addressed were the building completion, and I had written a condition of approval to address that, the vertical timetable. And I believe Anne Marie had addressed the lack of landscape plan and other final plans that she had called out and said they needed to supply. That's my thoughts on those.
I don't have the codes in front of me, but I would like to spend some time looking at that recreation development, the language in it, because it seems to me it does speak more to actual usable recreation space as opposed to a swale.
I'm searching for it now.
Okay. All right. Is there any, the other issue that I brought up as number 1 was the submission of this application as needed housing, but no housing being submitted as part of the application. Is that kosher?
I believe that what's required is, they submit for building permits for the structures. So I don't think they give you building permit applications. I think they come into the planning department. So this was an approval of the subdivision and plan development. So I think that it's needed housing, but that's different than saying it's housing. It's not a housing application. It's attached townhouses that are being approved as part of the PUD, which is why you get to put a 5-year vertical construction timetable on it, or whatever timetable you want.
Thoughts, other commissioners?
I value Richard Apicello's comments, but I think at this time that we have to represent the community, and this is not a good plan for the community because it's been piecemeal from the get-go, and I will not support it unless they make certain changes. And so my opinion hasn't changed from what I voiced earlier.
Okay, thank you, Miles. Anyone else? Kim?
I agree with Miles. My opinion on the development hasn't changed. I don't think it's for the good of the city, but if our hands are tied by everything else, then I don't see how much you can do other than we just put one clause in there that says we don't approve it from the planning commission and hand it over to the city council, I guess. I think this is a sloppy plan at best, and I think the things that you proposed, Patty, were right on target with maybe the street additions being included in the parking situations, but I keep on hearing there's nothing we can say or do about it, so I think it's like we don't like it, and therefore we pass. We just send it to the city council saying we think this is a bad plan, and we don't think it's in the best interest of the citizens of the community.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Lenny?
this is where we're going wrong. We're not passing it to anybody. If we
Right.
right, we're it. We are the final stop unless somebody appeals it, which is not usual.
No, I mean, if we say we deny it, it still goes on to the city council, right? So I guess.
If they, no,
we deny it.
Kim, if we deny it, the applicant has the option to challenge or appeal our decision, and that appeal goes to the city council.
Okay, I stand corrected on that. So,
Yeah, we're the final word on this particular subject. This is not a legislative text amendment.
okay, I stand corrected on that. So then I still stand for denying it.
Okay. Marcy, thoughts?
I mean, I think I'm in agreement with everyone else. The recreational area, I would like to hear the actual wording in the code. I was looking here, I was guessing it'd be under Title 16 for subdivisions. And there's something about open spaces, public open space. But I didn't know if that was the same as the recreational area requirements. But I think just leaving unbuildable land as is, that doesn't sound to me like, I mean, the code requires recreation area for a reason in the multifamily area. It's to create space for the families to recreate. So I agree with you on that, I think that, I mean, even, are you going to put any trash cans in, or is there going to be a bench? Just right. Something more. It just felt like very bare minimum, and I don't know. I think it's questionable whether it actually, without hearing the wording in the code, how are we supposed to know if it really meets that requirement or not?
Richard, do you have that code?
No, I haven't found what it is.
I think it's.
You remember that recreation areas and multifamily, something you saw a lot when Deb was here. This is different. This is not that.
I noted the code number, but I didn't write all the wording down. I have it at 17.52.260F.
260.
Minimum 250 square feet of recreational area shall be provided for each living unit. The recreational area may be in one or more locations in the attached single-family housing development. Recreation buildings may be considered as part of these requirements.
Yeah. And if you recall, they provided it, some of it was in backyards, some of it was in, passive recreation. But I don't see any requirement there for facilities or active recreation.
Well, yeah.
The definition of recreation doesn't go there either.
I mean, you could recreate in a street, right? Like, how are we?
So if nothing else, this has shown us some glaring loopholes in what I believe is the intent of those sections versus what you can actually get away with.
And it's still sticking with me that the only testimony we had was from a neighbor who was concerned about the traffic, and I feel like we have to consider that. And it is an issue, and you know, even though it might be a loophole in our code, I can't with a good conscience know that it would have been required and then let it go without, I mean, I don't know, I remember in the interview for Planning Commission with City Council, the last question I was asked was, what do you do when the code allows for something that's a bad idea, or the code doesn't allow for something that's a good idea? And what do you do at that point? And I feel like we're at that point. So what do we do?
Mac, you have anything you want to add to this?
Gosh, I don't think I have anything to add that hasn't been said already, that probably has been said more eloquently than I could put it right now. Yeah, I don't have really anything to add that hasn't been said before here.
Okay. Is it going to benefit us at all to continue the discussion, or are folks ready to go back to a motion to do something with this?
Well, I'm not shy. I'm ready to go back.
Okay, the floor is yours, Lenny.
I move that we deny this for the reasons listed by Patty in her excellent demarcation.
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I would suggest that you authorize Patty to sign the written order after we put it together.
I will add that to my motion.
Okay, is the second still in effect? Who seconded?
Yes.
Miles? Okay. All right, could we have a roll call, James?
Yes. Okay, Marcy Baker,
Yes.
Miles Schlesinger,
Yes.
Patty Crowan,
Yes.
Tim Blackerby,
Yes.
Max Smith,
Yes.
Lenny Nelson.
Yes.
Okay. That sounded unanimous to me.
Yep.
So Richard will put this together at some point?
Either James or I will put it together and get it to you for signature.
Okay, thank you. Any public hearings or deliberations tonight? Any old business? Not hearing any new business? Okay. Any planning commission training, Richard?
No.
Sorry, I shouldn't. All right, any reports or comments? Ron, how's our search for a senior planner going?
Very well. We have made a conditional offer. We're currently doing some background checking on it. If all goes as planned, our new senior planner will begin at the end of this month.
Oh, that's very quick. Great, good job. Thank you for moving so swiftly on that.
I think you'll be pleased.
Okay, good. Any future agenda items or anything for our next meeting? Okay. All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much for once again participating on Zoom, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
You.
When will the next meeting be held?
Oh,